Yeah, my name's Colin. I've been involved in the stone industry for a long time. What we're going to be talking about today is actually quite wide-ranging and broad. I'm going to be hoping to get you some information that means that you'll have less problems when you go to the task of selecting and having stone installed and then maintaining it. I've really sort of broken this talk into 4 sections. About the selection of the stone, about the selection of the installation system, key issues with particular types of stone, and I think that it's a bit of a heads up on what to watch out for when you're working with various types of stone, and the maintenance of stone too, because it's a whole package, and happy customers come from the right stone in the right spot that's maintained properly. So my background is one where I've been in the industry all the time, starting as a tile layer. I was the head teacher of tile laying at TAFE, and have progressed into a business of consulting and advising on stone and tile installation, and I'm on the Australian Standards Committees for waterproofing and stone and tiles, and a few other things around the place, including the Australian Stone Advisory Association. As I said, I'd like to keep this pretty much based on common language, but there are some technical aspects, and I don't mind handling questions as they come up. But please forgive me if I say, can we come back to that later, because you might be jumping ahead of where I'm at, or we might need to get on because of our time constraints. But otherwise, I don't mind taking questions as we go along. And if we've got any really hard technical questions, we've got a few other people out there that can handle them as well. I just want to focus in and say that this presentation really doesn't deal with slab installation on the exterior cladding, so mechanical fixing, terrazzo, really, I'm leaving it out. We're just trying to talk about dimension stone, which is any stone basically that can be cut into a shape and used. There'll be a little bit of talk probably about slip standards, because that's going to come up at the end, because it's such a hot topic that I think it's something that the Stone Advisory Association needs to take up and have special seminars on its own, because it's such a big topic. As far as I'm concerned, the right stone in the right location is the right hard surface solution. We've got many examples of it being there for millennia, and the problem with this though is getting the right stone and having it in the right location. Because most of our issues with stone end up because we haven't got the right stone, or we've put it into a situation that it can't handle. So it's all around this selection of the product which we want to talk tonight. Just on broad general things too, there's not a lot of information available out there about how green stone is. And stone has a strange green footprint in that it has a very high upfront production of CO2, but then it tails right off to virtually nothing for the rest of its life. So therefore, putting stone in and getting it right is really important, because it has to stay there for 20 years or more before it repays its carbon debt. So what we'll have is a stone that is put in the right spot requires almost no maintenance. So once the initial winning of the stone, the processing of the stone, the transporting of the stone is overcome, and the product's installed and stays there and performs well, it's got very low maintenance, and so therefore it returns everything in the way it's serviced. And what I want to do is look at this holistically and individualise, because I'm afraid when we're dealing with stone, they're all different. Even two pieces off the same block are likely to have different characteristics. All the different types of stone we have vary, and so therefore you can't go into this without choosing to know something about that particular product that you're going to be using. And sometimes you might find it's not the right one. So we've got broadly 3 groups, and everybody learnt them at school, of igneous, metamorphic and sedimentary. You know, it's just pretty much the way they were produced. We've got ones that came out of volcanoes, and some are intrinsic and extrinsic. Sometimes it didn't come out of the volcano, and it got stuck inside and still went hard. Some of it has been weathered away, and it was volcanic once, and it's now sandstone and quartz and other things, and it comes together in different states. And then we've got completely sedimentary ones that can turn around and actually move, like the bottom group there, the outsiders, and move back into one of the other groups. So that brecciated stone could be volcanic. It may have been sedimentary at a while. Part of it could be everything put together, and we get lumps of different stone melted back in under volcanic action, or forced back together under tectonic and heat and pressure. And so we've got all kinds of stones there, like conglomerates. And then travertine is classified as a marble, and when we look at its calcium carbon makeup and everything like that, then we know that it fits into that category, but it's not truly a marble in the form that it's not made in the same way as most other marbles, in that it's usually bubbling out of the ground in hot springs like Yellowstone or Rotorua or whatever, and with the whole of the Mediterranean Sea being a bit like that. And then Africa deciding to get closer to Europe, and then it all got pushed up onto the shores of Iran, Turkey, Italy and Spain. So we've got all kinds of things that are happening there, and I don't know if you need to know a lot about the actual origins of the stone, but sometimes it's good to know a bit of the background. When it comes to naming stone, we've got a lot of problems. The Europeans have tried to standardise this, so that all the different countries got together and tried to come up with what you would actually call that particular stone. And with there being thousands of different types and classifications, we can do some petrographic work and work out what the stone is from a macro position. But that's not what people know it in the shops and in the streets as. And so we get all people calling different stones different things, and sometimes they're the same stone called different things, and sometimes they're different stones called the same. So we've got problems out there in the marketplace, and sometimes they are causing confusion, particularly when it comes to selection. We've had cases of stones like Venezuelan green, which came from India, and Himalayan sandstone, which in some ways is an oxymoron, because the Himalayas are probably the last mountain range formed, still forming, and it's basically all granite. There isn't any sandstone there. It hasn't been weathered down, become quartz, mixed with mud and been compressed to become sandstone. So Himalayan sandstone is actually coming from 600 kilometres away, 1,000 kilometres away in Rajasthan. So calling it Himalayan sandstone is nice and romantic, but it's not necessarily very accurate. And the other aspect that I think you really do need to understand with stone, when it comes to what the value you get for your dollar, it isn't what you would normally expect somewhere else. If I pay money for a good piece of meat, I'll expect, and I know what quality it is, and I'll expect a really good piece of meat. But with stone, we can get a whole range of other aspects that come in that influence the price, and they can be, where is that stone? So we can get some beautiful granites from high in the Andes mountain, in which it's a one narrow track road that only a small truck can get up. And if you cut the blocks off and process it and bring it down to Peru, where there's no real shipping ports for moving it into to be processed, we can have a very, very expensive stone because of all of those issues. And we can have other stones that, for instance, crema marfil, which is a whole mountain range across the south of Spain. It's right on the Mediterranean. You just cut the block off, throw it in a boat, and we've got a pretty cheap stone that's actually not bad. So the price that you pay varies greatly on where it is, how hard it was to work. Some stones are hard to work, use a lot of diamonds, and the appearance. If it looks really great and it's rare, people are going to pay a lot for it. And so that all comes together with some influence from government, because in some countries they have to negotiate with the traditional owners of the land to be able to cut the stone from there. They have to be able to not pollute the rivers. They need to be able to rehabilitate the land when it's finished and meet all other kinds of government requirements, and so the cost of the stone goes up, whereas in some other countries there's hardly any environmental and government impact, and so that stone will be cheaper. Now, by the time you put all that into a mixing pot, price doesn't reflect quality necessarily. So We don't know how well that stone will perform by its dollar value. If we take a look at some of the things that are out there, just to give you a bit of a picture, because some people don't quite understand how we end up getting this product, and to think that 3,000 years ago they were cutting blocks of marble from Carrara using stone, using hemp ropes and sand to wear away the back edge of it and pull a block off a mountain. Incredible compared to our helical diamond wires and stuff we've got now. That's an upside down mountain range because the snow's in the valleys and it's not on the peaks. And that's because that's all mine refuse, or quarry refuse that's in the valleys. In fact, if you look closer, you'll find that there's little tracks where they have to get up and get the blocks off the sides of the mountains and carry them down. In some cases, they cut right into the mountainside in what we call galleries and cut blocks out of the centre of the mountain, following the good, clear product. And there's a whole range of equipment that's coming out, and stone's becoming cheaper because this equipment's becoming cheaper. Second-hand equipment's being sold on the international market. And almost any country that wants to try to reduce its debt says, well, why don't we just cut up lumps of land and sell it? And basically lots of countries have stone that's able to use this conventional stone, cut up and sold and processed. A lot of the processing was done in Italy, was traditionally done. They were the masters of it, they knew all about it. They kept a lot of their secrets themselves. They've since sold a lot of the secrets, and now China processes most of the stone. So even stone that might come from somewhere like Timor will be sent to China to be processed to be put back on the market. So that's a bit of an overview of stone itself, and what we need to do now is look at how do you select it, because there are some issues with it. And the first thing that most people do is, well, I want to look at the documents. What have we got that can help me decide what stone I'm going to use? And we've got the ASA design manual. We've got standards, Australia's standards 3958, 1 and 2. Now they're ceramic tile standards, but there's so much in common here that there's probably only 10 or 15% difference if we actually rewrote them as stone standards. The Australian Stone Standard, which was started back in 1994 as an idea of getting it together, has never actually been completed. So we don't have anything in Australia that helps us. So what you have to then rely upon a lot is the suppliers' data sheets. And in fact, the suppliers' data sheets are quite critical. You shouldn't be going very far at all without them. On top of that, you can do your own testing, or you can look at the data that's supplied by the supplier and see what tests have been done and see if you can interpret what the results of those tests are. The most common ones are Australian standards for pavers, and that stone falls into the paving category there. So we get a lot of range of battery of tests there. The CSIRO Best Built Environment Stone tests are very good. And there are a few other people that have written quite widely for Discovering Stone magazine that have written really good articles on selecting and testing stone. If we're falling back and we do want some other standards, we look at British standards, which are the English language version of the European norms, or we use the American ASTM tests, and they're pretty common. I think you really need to go to the supplier and get their assistance. The suppliers should be able to provide you with virtually all the information in the background on the product they're selling. The good ones. There's some out there that aren't very good. The good ones, I've been looking at the websites. There's a great deal of information. You can find out a lot about stone just by going to their websites. And they'll recommend certain stones for certain areas and not for other areas. And so it's a case of, I'm afraid, it's like buying anything. You need to do a bit of research and get the information together. And probably the most important thing you can do, and the most important question you can be asking, if you've got this going for a project, where else is this being used in a similar situation? I want to go and look at it and see how it's performing 1 year, 2 years, 5 years after it was laid. Because the past performance of a stone is a great way of predicting its future performance. If we look at the range of tests, and there's quite a range, this isn't all of them, there's more than this, and some of these break into different parts as well. But just to give you a bit of an idea, we're looking at the first one, which is probably the biggest and the main one. It's not very often done, in fact, because people know what a stain is, so they don't get the petrographic analysis. But the petrographic analysis is really looking down the microscope, looking at the crystals, the structures, the particles, and everything that's in there, and deciding what the makeup of that stain is. So, for instance, to be classified as a true granite, stone should be having above about 65% quartz and above about 20% feldspar. If it doesn't have that, it probably isn't going to be a quartz. It'll end up being a gneiss or one of the other products, the gabbro and the like. So that doesn't mean that it's necessarily worse and bad and it isn't real granite. It's just the way the petrographer looks at it. Then probably the next most important thing that you need to know is the water absorbency. Now, that's sometimes called the bulk density, and it's rated against what a cubic metre of water would weigh, and a cubic metre of water would weigh a tonne. So most stones coming at 2, 2.5 or even 3 tonnes per cubic metre. The lower the water absorbency, generally the harder the stone and the better it's going to perform, particularly if it's in a wet area. If we go to other tests, you won't need them all, and some will be relevant, some won't. Bending strength is quite important if we've got a thin stone and we're putting on a flooring, or it's going to take some stress. It's probably better than modules of rupture testing. So there's a whole range of things you can do there. Abrasion, or sometimes it's on a wall, you don't need it. Impact resistance, sometimes that might be needed or not. If we look at dimensional stability, some stones, and we'll look at this a little bit further on, are dimensionally not stable when wet on one side. So therefore they can change shape. It seems strange to think of stone changing shape, but basic principles of material science see the bottom take on some water. When it takes on the water, it gets bigger, and so the stone can cut. Or some react differently and will do all kinds of other things like green marble or serpentine, as it really is, and can buckle and warp and change shape and size. So we need to know a few of these things, because some stones will have a little bit of funny performance about them. Frost and salt attack, well, you don't need it if you're not going to be putting the products into areas that are going to have those conditions. And stain resistance and slip resistance are usually things that we worry about at the beginning, but we also have to worry about them at the end, because what we do to the stone and what happens to it in service can affect the performance. So the interpretation basically of those results, it gets a little bit complicated, and it's hard because you wanted to select a stone and you go to the website or you ask the supplier and he gives you a sheet that's got a whole pile of numbers and funny symbols, scientific symbols, and it doesn't mean anything to you. So you might need to get some expert advice on that, and your stone supplier can probably do that as well. But for instance, there are some tests that are done in the wet and some are done in the dry, and if they give you one and not the other, it might be that the stone is not actually really a good performer, because this is an internationally traded commodity. People want to sell it. They don't care too much about it once it's left their shores. What you do with it, they don't know the situation that you're going to be putting it in. And sometimes the information that's available isn't as up to date as it should be. And how much you really need to know about the tile that you're going to be using, the stone that you're going to be using, could be related to actually the size of your project. So if you've got a major project, then we've got major ways of checking quality control all the way through, and you need it. We have had cases of poor quality stone being put in place for good quality stone, and people don't know it until it arrives at the job site. So really on a major project we have kind of a 4-phase testing. We'll test the stone at selection. We'll do some initial testing of it from the factory or from the place of import. And then we'll do some design testing to make sure it's going to be able to withstand what it is that we're going to put it into, and we could even have some construction phase testing. Most of that deals with the big stuff, and it goes with outsides of buildings and major projects. For most minor projects, we normally end up relying upon the supplier's data. So your relationship with your supplier actually becomes quite important, and your supplier's relationship with the quarry becomes quite important. So we end up with the best people have been doing it for years. They've got reliable contacts with the quarries, and the people at the quarries don't give them any rubbish and don't slip anything in on them that shouldn't be in on them, and keep them up to date and look after them like good customers, and therefore you end up with a good quality product at the end. So it's a bit of a provenance issue. You need to be able to follow this back. You want to be able to trust the people that are in the chain. And quite often, when we get some product that isn't performing well, then it's been related to how it's been graded. And one last thing, that whenever you're doing with any of these projects, what you want to do is make sure that you hang on to the representative samples, because whatever it's been happening along the way, you've been shown a sample, and if you buy a stone from a piece of stone like that, I can tell you, you won't get it. It'll come out different, a range of things. So you can quite often do something that will allow everybody to know, and you mark up the samples and say, this is the darkest stone I'll accept, this is the lightest stone I'll accept, this is the most veined, this is the least veined. Right, this is the variation that I'm willing to accept, and anything outside of that will be rejected. Because we haven't got colour charts that mean that this stuff's the same all the time. So, and once again, after it's been used, and go and look at it. This is the best tip. Just before we move on to selecting the installation system, I think it's important to cover a little bit on the grading of stone. If we look at the way stone is generally graded, because it's not a manufactured item, it isn't necessarily made, or it isn't made to a standard. So what we cut off the mountain is going to vary. And what people tend to know is a style of stone. It's not worthwhile cutting some off the mountain if you're only going to get 5 blocks. By the time you put the samples out in the marketplace, you haven't got any left. So we want a pretty large supply that's going to run for a number of years before it's worthwhile cutting the blocks off the mountain, cutting up the samples, distributing them all around the place so that people can identify that stone and place their order. We need a pretty large amount of that. That means we're going to be cutting off bits of a mountain, and some of it are going to be better than others. And what happens is that we end up with what they call a classic or classico piece. So that some stones, I think you can almost draw up in your mind, if you've had any experience in the industry, that the classic Carrara looks white with a slight grey tinge and a light grey vein. And we know what Carrara marble looks like, and we expect that if we bought it, that it was going to look like that, because there's a classic Carrara look. It may be different to Statuario or Arabescato or other stones from the same mountain range, but you know, you need to know what the classic is. Classic Travertine and classic Nero Marchina. Some of these stones look a certain way. Now, if you ordered it and it came out not looking like it, you wouldn't be very happy. Somebody may have been going to that same place and said, before your shipment, I want them all like this. And they say, well, you're selecting out the best ones. And you say, yes, because I want the best. I'm willing to pay for the best. Well, that's fine. They just took the best of the stone. The guy's still got to sell the rest of it. He's not going to throw it on the tip. And that stuff hits the market as well. So we can get select grade and stuff that isn't quite as good as select grade. So we don't have first quality, second, third quality or anything like that. It's just, it doesn't quite look classic. It may not perform classically. And so that's a bit of an issue when some things look similar but might perform rather poorly because they don't have the technical characteristics that go with the classic stone. So in a way, it's something that you really need to look at is the select stone, classic stone, and know the provenance. It's really good to be able to trace back and say, well, I know where it came from. If we move on to the installation of the selection of the installation system, this has an impact on the whole way the stone performs. I can't give you every situation that's likely to come up. You've got to be able to turn around and do some research and say, I'm putting it on the interior or exterior I need to know if it's going to be on a wall or a floor. Is it going to be wet? Is it going to be dry? So there are a lot of things that have to be chosen before the actual installation system can be put in with it. On simple projects, you can turn around and say, well, the walls are rendered and we're just going to stick them on the tile piece. Well, that's fine. The selection, the choice of your installation system is probably going to be quite simple. But on your sheets there is a handout which comes from a rather old standard, I think a very good standard, AS 3958 Part 2. Not many people know about it, not many people read it, but the ceramic tile selection chart that you've got there, it takes you 5 minutes to read through and work out what's going on, but that would help you even on a major project to be able to get the right stone in the right location with the right installation system. And hopefully within a year or so we'll have something out that does relate specifically to stone. And what our issue, I suppose, is that I go and look at tiling problems and prepare technical reports, and a lot of it is related to water, what water does. And Leonardo da Vinci famously said, not many people know this, but I do, in time and with water, everything changes. And the same thing is going to be true with stone. If it hasn't got the water there, it will probably last forever. But the water is going to be something that needs to be addressed with it. Some stones have almost no difficulty, and others will have a great deal of difficulty. So that's what we need to concentrate on. And the pre-treatment and the post-treatment of the stone should be part of the whole process. So in fact, when you're planning this, it's not just a love affair with, I saw it and it's fantastic, it looks natural, it's got this warm, lovely feeling, I want it, I want it, I want it. That's not going to work if you don't turn around and say, what have I got to do before it's late and what have I got to do after it's late? Because you might end up with a bit of an unhappy marriage. That's the extract that you've got there, hopefully beside you, and the information that's on there has been complemented by a range of articles in Discovering Stone magazine on the selection of stone and the selection of tiling systems and the like. So if you have to do it as a major project, you've got to do some research and some reading. If we now look at the major problems that I find that are out there, what the people are ringing me up and saying there's a dispute, then staining is probably one of the biggest things that I have to deal with. And it could be a range of things, and I'll talk about each of these very briefly and have a few photos of some of them. The picture framing where moisture on the edge of the tile has gone into the edges of the stone but not to the centre, changes the colour. Or we can get bleed through with certain types of products coming all the way through the stone, just changing it slightly as they carry minerals through. And we can get a whole range of other things. Take a look at the next lot. We can have efflorescent staining and have problems with the installation, and we can have problems with the maintenance. But just to look at some of these, for instance, in this case, the adhesive that was used on the back of the stone was a cement-based adhesive. It was mixed with water. It didn't have certain other things in it. Nothing was done to the stone before it was laid. These tilers put the tiles on with 5 dots of adhesive on the back of it. That was fine. They managed to complete 80 bathrooms before the problem really started to become evident. Now, the reason that it didn't become evident straight away was because the water would come through and that it's changed the whole colour of the tile. And so the whole bathroom would have gone a bit darker and nobody would have noticed anything. Then as things have dried out, the calcium carbonate, the calcium hydroxide that's been coming with the water and the cement in the mix has moved through the stone end at the front, and it's moved into the little pores in the stone, and at a later time the calcium hydroxide reacts slowly because the stone's sealed with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it turns the calcium hydroxide into calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is marble, but it looks a little bit grey, and so it looks like it's wet spots. So after a few months, they started to know they've got wet spots, and you end up with a pretty big court case to try to solve something like that. To show you the extent of it, this was the guy that was putting on mostly with 4 spots. And we had another guy there with 4 spots, and this bloke, we called him Big Blob Man, because he just tended to put the tiles on with a big blob on the back. So we knew which tile would work in which room, basically. We can get things like water staining, and stone, like lots of things, if you walk into the ocean with your jeans on and you get wet up to the knees, the bottom part of your jeans is going to look dark. And same thing happens with stone. As the water moves through, it can change the colour of it. And in this case, there's no water stop angle as required by Australian standards now, waterproofing code. And the water, the moisture from inside the shower recess is moving slowly across the rest of the floor. Preventing something like that is going to require the back of the stone to be served with something permanently, or water stop angle, and be prepared to have some darker tiles in the shower than outside of the shower. That's what we need to know a bit about with the stone. When it comes to picture framing, we can have it light. In this case, where once again calcium hydroxide is moving sideways into the edges of the stone and causing that picture framing. We can get this granite in an airport overseas that I saw, where there's obviously a leak somewhere, but the moisture travels up through that, wants to achieve equilibrium. So it comes up through the joints first. The stone's relatively dense, and it can't come really up through the stone, or it takes a long time. But it's much easier for the water to move out and up through the joints. The joints are relatively porous, so most of the water keeps on coming up and rising up through there and giving us the picture framing effect. In this case, the tiler didn't smear grout all over the tiles, he just grouted the joints, and in doing so he left grout in the edges of the tiles, and we couldn't get it out. We just simply couldn't get it out. It was a black oxide, and we thought, well, if we can stain the tiles darker, then we might have a chance. But just by putting some water on the floor, I was able to show that an enhancing sealer would make the stone go darker, but it would also make the joints, the picture framing, go darker, so all you end up is the same thing, but darker tiles. So we've got to, sometimes it might be a case of making sure that the tile, if you're using a coloured grout, grouts all over the tiles and doesn't just grout the edges. A lot of problems can come up. With white marbles in particular, lots of light marbles, we can have traces of ferrous oxides in there, and that means that at some stage moisture moving through that stone and then coming in contact with oxygen is going to give you rust, and so we can get some very high quality, beautiful, in this case, vein matched stone, and we've got a problem because it's going brown and very hard to treat. So knowing a bit about the stone, sealing the back of those tiles completely with a water-based epoxy is likely to give you some protection against that kind of effect. Once again, there's some water staining that's going out past the shower because of the failure to incorporate a proper working water stop. Even if there was a water stop there, chances are the inside of the shower would have gone a darker colour than the outside. So knowing your water absorption of your stone is important. In fact, thinking of that particular job, one of the broadest categories of stone that we've got is limestone. So whilst we have granites and they're very hard and they're acid resistant, we have some stones that can be relatively hard but are not acid resistant. Most of the calcareous, marbles and limestones will be eaten by even mild exposure to acids. And water will also have different effects on it. So knowing what your stone is going to be important in actually predicting how it's going to perform. In this case, once again, the water stop angle in the shower just wasn't working, so moisture was travelling out, but because this rosa coloured marble was not going to change colour when it got wet on one side, but the moisture still moved up through the stone and was bringing a few residual salts, and we end up with the surface flaking and fretting. That wouldn't happen in the shower because it's wet in the shower all the time. The salts never get a chance to dry out and expand. So if they had had a proper working water stop angle at the shower, the wet side would stay wet, it would never dry out, the salts would never expand, the tiles would be fine. The dry side wouldn't get wet, so it would never dry out, and doesn't leave the repetitive cycles of wetting and drying that allows the salt to build up to the point where it can explode the surface of the tile. We talked a little bit about dimensional stability, and in this case the tiles were laid in the mortar bed, and within a week I was there saying, well, what the hell's gone wrong? Because the edges were all drummy, but the middle was solid, and the tile has taken in water on the underside, curled up slightly, and broken the bond. So we tap the centre and it's solid, go to the edges and it's all hollow. That means that there's a little bit of movement, we're usually only talking a millimetre or so. The curvature can be quite radical and happen within an hour to 4 hours of being wet, and it can then sometimes dry out within the next day or so and drop right back down. So you might have had 3 millimetres of curl and you only end up with a 0.5 millimetre of curl, but it's broken the bond, and the tile, when it's loaded, can move, and then the grout joints crack and you're in trouble. It's not a really good photo, but in this case this is a Sydney site where the person had a honed travertine outside. They weren't advised that the travertine is sensitive enough to react with acid rain. So the rain in Sydney is sufficiently acidic so that all the areas that weren't under the eaves of the house lost their shine and started to go white. They could be restored with a bit of a rub, but it's going to happen again. It's very difficult to protect. There are some mechanisms there for protecting against acid attack, but most of them are not really very good. We can get issues like punch through, which is really relatively common with fleuri cut travertine. So with travertine, most of the time we've got the bubbles and veins all lining up, and when it's cut, vein cut, it's pretty tough stone, not much happens to it, hard wearing, salt resistant, it's great. And if we cut it the other way, we get flower cut, which is fleuri in Italian. So we end up with flower cut, which doesn't give us as many holes, but it can give us the hole that's just underneath a very thin layer of stone. So somebody walking on it, particularly with high heels or the like, can get to that point and punch it through. Not a big problem. It's got to be fixed. Put in some coloured fill, and we're usually out of there. But some stones are really bad with it, and once again, it's knowing the problems of the stone and the supplier. If it was really cheap, you might find out why it was cheap. Efflorescence is a pretty big issue, and now since 2007 in New South Wales, the Office of Fair Trading has said that it's a building defect, and that's really tough, I think, because it's very difficult to stop. I've written some papers on it, and Tony's published them, how you can control it, and I think that with good building practices you can just about stop it. But when we get big cases like this, then somebody's going to be in trouble. What you need to be doing is designing it out. So once again, this is an issue for you. It doesn't just happen with stone, it can happen with almost any kind of surface that's got water underneath it, ceramic tiles or the like. But what you need to do is make sure that the water that gets down into the substrate goes and drains at the drain, at the neck of the drain. It can get out of the system. If you haven't got that, you're going to be in trouble. So if water ponds on the area that you're going to tile, before you tile it, water's still going to pond there underneath the bed, and the only way out is for it to rise up through the joints, and you're going to get some efflorescence. If you've got that subsurface drainage, then water can get away and it stops it from having to come out through the joints. You need to put water stop angles at the tops of stairs and things like that, so that all the water in the bedding doesn't come down the stairs. And then seal it. If we can stop water getting in, we don't have any water coming out. If we don't have water coming out, we don't have any efflorescence issues. So it's a combination, the whole attack to stop efflorescence, and just be aware of it for your projects. And then we're getting a bit of cryptofluorescence. crypto because it's inside. The efflorescence here is a bit like I discussed with a couple of others. The pores of the stone allow water to travel through, and when that water dries out, it's carrying some calcium hydroxide. That reacts with carbon dioxide. Some weeks or months later, it turns into calcium carbonate. When it turns into calcium carbonate, we can't get it out. So we're getting a permanent change in the look of the stone. Happening quite a bit with exfoliated granites. Exfoliation blows open a fair amount and fractures the surface of it. It's a flaming process. So, we've got more shattered edges and it's places where product can get in. And when we've got marble, which we can get off with acid, no problem. We can get marble basically forming in those tight cracks. But when we put the acid and we eat the marble away on the top, we can't leave it there long enough to get all the way down through all the cracks to get it out. So we just can't do anything except replace the offending tiles in most cases. So cryptofluorescence, we can seal it from the top, and we need to seal it from the undersides. That starts to become an expensive process. You need to know a bit about it. Having subsurface drainage can help. Having no grout joints basically fixes the problem. We've got other problems also that can occur with stone that are a bit unusual for most building products. We can have a problem with sealant bleed. That is the polyurethane or silicon type products that you put in an expansion joint where two walls meet or where there's a movement joint in floors. The process of curing those moisture cured products is that they have a plasticizer in, and that plasticizer actually gets forced out as the product becomes harder. The plasticizer is capable of staining in some cases, and so it gets sucked sideways into the edges of the stone. So we can get a wet look down beside the movement joints with the silicones being used. So if you're using these kinds of products, and you have to, then make sure you get one of the no bleed type of products. They're usually described as safe for stone and things like that. Wear, well, one of the good things about stones in most cases, if we've got a wear problem, we can usually fix it up because we can polish it again and treat it again. So wear isn't a real big issue, but you need to select the stone to suit your area. If it's going to be a polished marble, it's going to scratch with sand that comes on people's feet, and it might not be really good for a floor in an area where sand's going to be carried in. So you just need to be able to know that you're going to have some maintenance with this product if you choose the wrong one for the wrong spot. We can remove efflorescence from a lot of products if it's not cryptofluorescence on the inside of the stone. We can use acids on granites and clean them up, but we can't use acids on marbles. So we have to use a whole range of other products. There are a few out there now that can remove some stains from the surface of marbles, but you're better off not having it there in the first place. If we look at some of the other problems, including grout joints, lipping between tiles, drumminess and the like, they're installation issues. They're ones that we can normally tackle by having the right supervision when the work's going ahead. Right, we've got quality control, we've got standards that tiles have to be laid to. That's an issue, but it's just one that should be controlled at installation. And that goes along with colour blending too, because sometimes our stone comes in crates and they start using one crate, and by the time they get to the third crate, it's a bit of a different colour, and you end up with one side of the room a whole lot darker than the other side of the room, or stripes of different colours. It is up to the tiler to work out of numerous packets to try to blend that together, to not put 5 dark ones in a row. So that's an issue, it's a tiler control issue, but you should be given instructions that you work out of more than one packet. If we look now at the last part of this segment, then we want to look at sealing and maintenance. And as I said in the beginning, this is really an integral part. We have to not only select the right stone for the site, we've got to install it the right way, but we have to maintain it. If we get that right, we get a long-lasting surface that's good for everybody. Everybody's happy with it. Sometimes stone needs pre-sealing, and that's going to need some input probably from your supplier. More absorbent the stone, chances are more it's going to need to be sealed. It might need to be sealed on the back. We've got different types of sealers that work there. Some are methylene siliconates that don't repel cement, which mean that they don't do a job of stopping the cement from sticking the tile in place. we've got to be a bit careful about what we do. They're good for stopping stones that are likely to curl. They're good for stones that are going to stain, and they're good in areas that aren't going to be out for continual saturation. What we find is that any sealer has what we call a dwell time. It's how long the water can stay on the surface before it gets away. On the front of the tile, well, that's fine. You can spill water on it, and within a day it's going to evaporate. So if the dwell time of the sealer is a day, the water's lost the fight, it didn't get through the stone. But if we've got a sealer that's got a 2, 3, 4 day dwell time before water will start to get through it, and we've got stone that's wet on the underside, it's going to be wet for weeks, months, forever. So that water is going to get through that sealer. So we might have to go to a complete barrier, such as a water-based epoxy. Now it's starting to get expensive, painting the back of every tile and letting it dry before you lay it. But if you really want that stone in that situation, you might have to do it. The next type is penetrating seals. There's a wide range here. Some are solvent-based, some are water-based. We're moving towards water-based products. The performance of water-based products is improving. They go in. You can't see that they're there. We get the good ones, they'll repel oil and water, and they'll have a relatively strong, long dwell time for those products to sit on the top. But I'm afraid they don't help too much against acid. So I could have, not that I would ever do it, but a nice Carrara bench top, and I know that even though it's sealed, and I might have only sealed it yesterday, if I put some lemon juice on it, it's going to jump across that sealer, because it's a bit like a spark plug gap. We're getting an ionic reaction between positive and negative, and it jumps through the sealer. So the sealers aren't really very good at protecting against acids. So penetrating sealers are good. How long they last is up to where they are, the type of sealer, and how well it's been applied. And I'll just give you this. You can't, manufacturers say, oh, we give you 5 years warranty. Well, you can't give me 5 years warranty in a shower where it's hot water with shampoo and the people clean the place with bleach and other aggressive chemicals. The sealer just won't last. Put it outside and it will last. So it depends on the environment, once again, on how long the sealer is going to last. And you need to be able to say, I need to reseal this again. How would you know when it needed to be resealed? Probably the easiest and best way to do it is to know that the joints are probably more absorbent than the stone. So if you can go somewhere and put water on a joint and watch it for a minute or two, and the water starts to make that grout joint go darker, then water's getting past the sealer that's on that grout joint, so it's time to reseal. If the water still beads up and it doesn't go in and make the grout joint darker, you're probably going to be okay to not seal it again yet. And that would mean it'll vary for inside, outside, how much it's cleaned, the type of stone, the width of the joint, and a whole lot of other things. But it's a pretty simple test. We occasionally have top sealers. Usually they're there as a sacrificial coating. They're there to try to protect a pretty soft stone in a harsh environment. They're a varnish, basically. You're going to be putting something over the top that's going to try to stop the surface of the stone being attacked by anything. It'll wear away, it'll need to be recoated. At some stage it's probably going to have to be stripped right back and then start again. But good top sealers are used in shopping malls over terrazzo, and they're pretty tough and not necessarily bad things. It's just that we can't use them outside. And pretty much finally, what we need to do, it's important for anybody who's involved in the specification of stone and who's selling stone, I suggest that you have very clear written maintenance instructions for your products. We've got 3 ways that we normally talk about maintenance of stone. It's spot, routine and periodic. And for spot maintenance, it's what you do to get something off that's been spilled. And getting red wine or beetroot or something like that off, tar, chewing gum, whatever, might be quite different, and you'll have a process for that, and you should be told what that process is so you don't damage the stone when you try to get it off. With your routine maintenance is what's happening on a weekly, monthly basis. Can you get in and scrub it with this? I mean, I went and looked at a beautiful bathroom that had been destroyed basically over on the North Shore, where the lady had gone in and bought some BAM for her Nero Marquina black marble bathroom, and she thought there was a bit of mould and whatnot in the shower, so she sprayed it all on and left it for about 2 hours. So it could do its work. Well, it did its work. It etched the whole surface of all the walls, and all you had was dribble marks where the BAM had been. And you look at the back of the bottle of BAM and it says, "Do not use on marble, natural stone." So there's products out there that might be the wrong thing to use, and you need to be able to advise people what they should use and shouldn't use. In most cases, neutral detergents and the like are going to be fine. White scouring pads, all those green, you get green in different colours. The white one tends not to damage stone, it's softer. And so you can actually do a little bit of aggressive cleaning if you wanted to and not damage the stone, but go over to the blue, the green, the brown or something, and you're going to scratch the stone. So you need to be able to know what the routine maintenance should be on a regular basis. And then every now and then, most stone will require something special. And if that's the case, then you might have to say that you're going to have to strip it back, or you're going to have to buff the surface, or you're going to reapply something special to it. And you need to advise the people that that can take place, and it might be every 6 months to test for it. And what I've found is lots of sealer early on, and most of your problems go away. If you don't seal well enough and often enough at the beginning, then something starts to happen. Now, that's basically all I've got to say, but I'm quite happy to take any of your questions. You've been quiet as mice out there, so I'm sure that there'll be one or two people who've got a question.